You may rise for the reading of Scripture from Ecclesiastes 1. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does man gain from all his labor in which he labors under the sun? One generation goes, and another generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun also rises, and the sun goes down, and hurries to its place where it rises. The wind goes towards the south and turns around to the north. It turns around continually as it goes, and the wind returns again to its courses. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place where the rivers flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness beyond uttering. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. That which has been is that which shall be, and that which has been done is that which shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun. Is there a thing of which it may be said, Behold, this is new? It has been long ago, in the ages which were before us. There is no memory of the former, neither shall there be any memory of the latter that are to come. Among those that shall come after, I, the preacher, was king over Israel and Jerusalem. I applied my heart to seek and to search out wisdom concerning all that is done under the sky. It is a heavy burden that God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a chasing after wind. That which is crooked can't be made straight, and that which is lacking can't be counted. I said to myself, Behold, I have obtained for myself great wisdom over all who were before me in Jerusalem. Yes, my heart had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also was chasing after the wind. For in much wisdom is much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. This is the word of God to the people of God. You may be seated. All right, well, kicking off with that portion of Scripture can be a little bit dampening, but that is actually probably the most important chapter in the Bible to me personally. I actually have a single tattoo, and Ecclesiastes 1 is what that tattoo is. And I discovered it when I was in college trying to piece things together on my theology and understand what I was going to do in life. And a lot of guys get into their 20s and they get to that place. They really don't know what direction they're supposed to go. They start trying to figure it out on their own. And when I read this, I thought, here's a guy who was king over the nation of Israel, which was the greatest nation at the time. There were no wars to worry about or really any struggles. He just had it really good. And all he would do is try to find some kind of meaning out of what we can get in this flesh and on this earth. And he had everything, and we just read how he's feeling about it. That sat with me as a young man who thought, if I could get all the money in the world, all the influence or the prestige, if everyone could tell everyone how good I'm doing because of what my job is, that I thought would make me happy. And yet, all the pursuits of King Solomon left him miserable. So, this sermon is titled A Thankful Testimony, coming in off of Thanksgiving. Testimonies are important. Whether you think yours is important or not, they are. Because it's our story with Jesus. We have our story that we tell about ourselves to inflate ourselves, to make ourselves sound good. But our testimony is how Jesus came in and saved us from whatever it was that afflicted us. And he did save me. So, we'll go ahead and just discuss the early years. I'm just going to share a little bit about my life, where I came from, what led me to here. And it's not all good, fun stuff. Some of it was tough. But I'm going to explain why, especially when you're thinking about the children in your lives, it's so important to constantly communicate who Jesus is to them. In my story, that's what it's about, because he walked with me from the very beginning when I didn't understand anything. So my dad was 50 when I was born. I was born in 1990. He was part of the silent generation. He was born in 1939. He wanted a son. He had a biological daughter and a stepson. I'm sorry, not a stepson, an adopted son who turned on him, basically. And he wanted to have a child that was a son that was his own, and he did. I assume he prayed. I don't know that for a fact. But I arrived in 1990. By the age of 2, both my parents divorced. And I don't have any memory of them ever being together. And that's one thing I hope people carry is when marriage becomes a topic of discussion and kids are involved. There's nothing more important than saving that marriage. My previous church that I went to, our youth pastors, gave his testimony of some things that he went through with his wife when he had all the right in the world to step away from that marriage. But he didn't. He wouldn't give up. And they're still together today. And I think as we grow as Christians and learn the impacts of our decisions, sometimes we forget that the kids grow up and might be standing in front of us in 30 years. I also, at the age of 2, had a health crisis. If you've gotten a chance to meet with me and talk with me, you may have seen that my skin is sometimes out of whack. Sometimes I have scabs and wounds, and it's autoimmune. It's been with me since I was a child. I'm still praying for healing. I've received plenty of healing and plenty of peace from Jesus up to this point to allow me to even be here. But I've been dealing with autoimmune issues and been kind of a medical anomaly basically since the beginning. At the age of 2, they gave me penicillin, and it nearly killed me. They didn't know I was allergic, and it was a very scary moment for my parents. By the time I got chickenpox, which everyone expected, mine was special and rare. It was bad, and I still am covered in scars from it. I knew Jesus, and I knew Jesus, right? I don't have like someone introduced him to me, and I remember that moment because it was so early on that I don't know life without knowing who Jesus is. So we should be telling our children who he is. Even as my children are behind learning how to speak right now, I'm still talking to them about Jesus. And nothing lights me up more than when they sing along to a song about Jesus on the TV. I know that no matter what happens, even if God were to take me out of this world or Jamie out of this world, I know that Jesus walks with them. Because it was our will as parents to tell God, we're the parents right here, but you're the ultimate parent, and we're really just stewards trying our best to do your will. So my mom remarried when I was 5, and they relocated. We left Kirkwood, Missouri, around St. Louis, and went over into Illinois, into Collinsville, where I grew up. My dad followed as soon as he could. And when I got there, I was put into a private school, a Lutheran school. I don't have much disdain towards the private school that I went to, but the children that were there were kind of mean. I was bullied out. By the time I got to 6th grade, I finally convinced my parents to let me leave the private school and go to a public school of all things, where I was actually kind of accepted with open arms. Maybe I was just, the Christian that they wanted to figure out, because that's what I brought, right? I came from a Christian school. Christian private school kids don't go to public schools. But I got along with a lot of kids there, and I went from having Bible study every day to having mythology taught to me every day. I remember arguing with the teacher about that, and I didn't get very far. I had really poor social skills. I attribute a lot of this to just varying households. My dad being born in 1939 and growing up during the World War and all of this, there wasn't really a lot of room for sarcasm. He didn't really care for sarcasm. He just said the thing that you said and you thought. And that wasn't very well received by kids who were being raised by a different generation, where sarcasm is cool and being mysterious and not really getting at what you're saying and all this stuff that I had to learn in order to get along. But at the time, I just didn't have good social skills. I like to collect things like rocks and crystals and cards. And I'd be off by myself at recess for the most part. My life really revolved around getting to my dad's, is what it was. I wanted to hang out with my buddy. I wanted to be with my dad. Now, I didn't get as much time with him as I would have liked, but I had two completely opposing households. So you could take two different polar opposites and examine the outcomes and realize that you should really meet in the middle. On my dad's side, we didn't have any money. I don't know what he was doing on the weekends. He would go to Schnucks and do something magic with a check, and he would have money for a couple days. I don't know what it was. But anyways, that would get us out to where we were going. On the other side of the spectrum, my mom remarried, and my stepdad was an engineer. He made a ton of money. He was always getting gifted vacations, and we traveled all over the place. I always just wanted to come home, though, no matter how cool the location was. Kids just want to be with someone that loves them and loves them outwardly, shows them that love. And I felt that when I was with my dad, but my stepdad left that gap there. I didn't feel it then, and I didn't want to be there. And at the age of 6, my dad had to have a triple bypass surgery. I didn't know if he was going to live. None of us did. He did survive, and God granted him some more time with me. But all in all, for the most part, I was a loner. Just didn't click socially, just didn't quite get it. I'd say something and think that it was normal, and someone would laugh at me, and didn't get it. Moving into my early teens, though, at the age of 12, I decided to be baptized outwardly. We had found this up-and-coming non-denominational church, and it was fresh, and we thought it was, upbeat and cool and different. And I really liked the pastor, and I wound up getting baptized in a lake. And I specifically remember that even more vividly than I remember something like 9/11, which you can, as you know, we can all see it in our own mind's eyes. I remember the bright light of the sun coming out of the water and just all these feelings. And it wasn't an assuredness that I was going to have a comfortable life, but it was an assuredness that God was there with me through it, no matter what came. So in my early teens, about 12 to 14, a lot of the time that I spent with my dad, we had developed going out to Sullivan, Missouri. So we'd drive down from St. Louis every weekend or every other weekend and just figure out how to be there in a way. Sometimes we'd bring a camper along. Sometimes we'd be allowed to use a little cabin. We'd hunt, fish. I'd use my allowance money to purchase my first horse. We would try to break him and fail and end up getting an older horse for me. Just, a lot of really good memories. But I also learned a lot of stuff that we take for granted, like how to feed yourself when no one feeds you, how to protect yourself, how to prepare for things. It's a highlight of my life. And on the other end, I was going on a lot of vacations with my mom and Harold, and we were going to all kinds of cool places. You'll see on the picture behind me, that's Pearl Harbor out in Hawaii, and that's on one of the ships out there. I got to play with one of the guns. Got to do a lot of really cool stuff, a lot of stuff that a lot of kids don't get to do, and I don't devalue that in any way, shape, or form. But I learned that I had a lot more fun sitting up against a tree in the woods with my dad than I did traveling to Hawaii and staying in expensive hotels or climbing up mountains when my stepdad didn't seem to want me there. I mentioned that I was bullied out of private school. I was welcomed to public school. I was in the band for a little bit. If you can imagine, I was an oboe player. Pretty much everything that comes by my way is going to be a little strange, a little off norm. But I started with the oboe. As soon as that didn't seem cool enough, I switched to the trumpet. So imagine buying for your son the most expensive instrument you can possibly imagine, and he switches a year later. But anyways, that's where I was. I was growing up in my mom and stepdad's household for the most part until the age of 12. My self-esteem was just shattered, though. I had no self-esteem. I did not know how to talk to anyone, any kids my age. I'd hold a friend for a few months, and it wouldn't last. I'd weird them out or whatever it was. I don't know. But I was pretty much a loner that was not thinking too highly of himself. And then finally, at the age of 12, my mom and Harold got a divorce, and I got to just live with my mom and just live with my dad. And I loved it. I truly, truly loved it. Going into high school, I lost interest in academics. Didn't see the point of it. Didn't want to talk to anyone about that kind of stuff. I remember sitting in class and just wondering, how long does this go until I can go home? Just wanted to go home. Didn't want to be there. I dropped out of band in the 9th grade. When I talk about being socially inept, the band kids made fun of me. We'll put it that way, okay? When the band kids make fun of you, you're in trouble. So I left band, and of course, when we go off course like that, when we get off the rails, we wind up with the bad crowd. And that's where I wound up. Those were the ones who received me. They were the ones that were troubled, the ones that would fight, drugs, drinking, you name it, all of it. I got involved, and I thought I fit in, but I was really just kind of a mockery to them. And I think we need to let people know, kids know especially, they think the bad crowd's inviting them in because they care about them. It's not. The bad crowd doesn't even care about themselves at that time. Otherwise, they wouldn't be harming themselves like that. But I did, and I hung out with them really until God gave me a gift, and it was a girlfriend of all things in high school. Never thought I'd get a girlfriend. I mean, I couldn't make a friend to begin with. But he knew that there was going to be some tough times coming, and that girlfriend kind of required me to cut my long hair and stop dyeing it colors and start acting like a normal human being and keep showing up to work and that kind of stuff, and it did. It leveled me out. And it was just in time for probably the hardest time of my life. But I was still getting bullied. I was still the smallest kid in school. There was never a boy that was smaller than me. I don't even know if there was a girl that was smaller than me. I've always been tiny. So what did my dad do when I started getting picked on? He put me in boxing. And I loved boxing. And my dad, this is really towards the end of his life. He didn't have much. But he would drive me out there from Collinsville to Granite City. And it was a good 30, 40-minute drive. It was a lot of gas. It was a lot of time, so he could just sit there and let me train. But he'd do it. And then as I got closer to 16, he started teaching me how to drive in these bad areas, him being a former cop, and not get carjacked, basically, right? We were in East St. Louis. This boxing gym was in Venice, outside of Granite City. So he taught me a lot about just being aware of your surroundings and how you position yourself in your car. And just stuff that dads should be teaching their kids. Still value that. After my first boxing match, though, my eczema caught up with me, my skin condition, and I could no longer exercise and sweat. I ended up rubbing at myself and causing some pretty good damage on my arm with my boxing glove. So that was the end of boxing, and that was pretty close to what we'll talk about next, which is my best friend was gone. On my 16th birthday, my dad had a heart attack that night. I had just gotten my license that day, and he called me in to call an ambulance for him. Excuse me. Anyways, he survived that, and he came home, and I decided to move in with him. So I moved in with my dad and stayed with him until the end came, which was later that year. He had to have another surgery, another bypass. But he didn't come through that one. He came out with a stroke. We had 3 months of experiencing what it's like to lose someone slowly. To go from thinking that they're going to be okay to they're going to be different to they're going to be gone. And the grieving process and the just shattering pain to lose a parent. But what it did, because God always turns bad for good, and it taught me how to empathize to where a couple weeks ago I was actually able to sit with someone before a celebration of life and talk to them about those very feelings that they were going through and help them to realize that this is a normal way to process the loss of someone you love. No matter what I was going through, God always had a plan, and he does for each and every one of you. So my dad went to Jesus on January 3rd, 2007, and instead of just tampering with the bad crowd, at that point, I really kind of lost my way, and I started embracing sin to where there was no morality guiding me. I started to realize that I was a cause and effect in the world, and if I wanted anything out of this life before I died, I had to go get it for myself. It wasn't about asking God, and when you go that route, you start learning how to manipulate people. You start learning how to manipulate situations and figuring out how to get what you want. Prayer seemed pretty pointless to me at that point. Sometimes I would pray, but not very often. And a lot of times I remember thinking, it's time to pray, but I don't feel like it, so I'm just going to go to bed. And it's like I was telling God that I don't feel like talking to you today. Wouldn't be long till a spirit of rage set in. There was an instance with a road rage incident where I ran some guy off the road, and he came and attacked me, and it was just a mess. And that was just the beginning of it. I mean, it was just, I was a wreck without my dad. I did not know what to do. All I wanted to do was find a reason to get into a fight with someone. Whether it was arguing or physical, I didn't care. I just wanted conflict. I'd embraced sin in the way that I didn't care that I was sinning anymore. That's what I talk about when I say the word embracing sin. People ask me, is this a sin? Is that a sin? Well, so there's plenty of sins. But when you embrace sin, you don't care that it's sin anymore, and you choose it for yourself. I did get a period of calm. I talked about that high school sweetheart, that girlfriend I managed to get. It's not Jamie. We only stayed together for 4 years. She was there when I needed her, and that was a gift from God because I was not a gift to her. I was an unhinged young man. I was codependent. I was insecure. And I did everything to make that relationship as miserable for her as I could. But God put her there to be there for me when taps played. God put her there to be for me when I needed to straighten up and start acting right. And through the years of 2008, 2010, when I was 18 to 20, it was really kind of a period of calm. I was still lost, and I didn't have any direction, and my girlfriend's parents at that time were pretty much done with me because it looked like I was never going to hold a job that wasn't at a pizza parlor. But I was recovering. And by the age of 20, that relationship ended. And I became what I call a wandering millennial. Didn't really know what I was doing with my life. I planned to go into the military like my dad was. That was the plan. I wanted to be buried next to him at Jefferson Barracks. And every branch rejected me because of my asthma, which is just part of the immuno problems I've had. I was so serious about going into the military that when I took our standardized test, the ACT, I put C's down the whole thing and went to sleep. I wasn't going to college. I was going in the military. I didn't care. Well, when they rejected me, I was kind of up a creek, wasn't I? So I started studying everything that I could. I started studying social psychology so I could figure out how people worked, what made them tick, what made me tick, what was wrong with me. I took a pretty much Gnostic approach, which I would never advise anyone to do. That means trying to live your life based on your own knowledge and nothing else, using your knowledge to get what you want. I learned how to convince people to buy things. I learned how to talk to people and befriend them just so I could get what I wanted and never talk to them again. Eventually, I moved from having a retail sales job to a job on the road where I got to go out to Washington, D.C. in that area and some other states down to Dallas and just do sales and just explore, just be lost as a 20-something, 21 at the time, and figure it out. Eventually, I got tired of that. I realized that living that lifestyle meant you embrace that lifestyle of living on the road, and that wasn't for me anymore. I was always going to the bars, but I was also showing up for a church service pretty much every Sunday trying to figure this Christian thing out. I'd walk into churches constantly. I would ask to see the pastor. And then I'd have some tough questions that I had about Christianity and why I should believe it. One time I was dating a girl who was a Christian, did not want to have sex because she was a Christian. So I asked the pastor, well, why? Well, what does it say in the Bible and why? And I remember him telling me about STDs. Like, I can get that in high school. There are actual spiritual implications and consequences when we choose to get intimate with another person. But a pastor wasn't going to tell me that. I had to find it out for myself. Moving on, I got to college. Still didn't have a church, but I got to college. Something overcame me and decided I was going to get a degree in computer science of all things. I had no math credits. I mentioned in high school how I didn't try very hard. I took pre-algebra and I took geometry, I think. That's it. So by the time I told an academic advisor that I wanted to be a computer scientist, they had 10 credit hours of courses for me to take that didn't count towards any degree, just to play catch-up. And from there, trig, stats, all the calculuses and discrete mathematics. I called them heck days because I had my classes so bunched up with my full-time job. I'd leave the house at 6 in the morning, drive an hour, take a class, drive an hour to work a full-time shift, drive to class for the evening, and then drive home, get home about 10 at night. While this was going on, my health started to catch up with me. One thing that happened, I had a bad eczema breakout. I went to a hospital. The doctor there gave me, anyone in the medical industry will know this is outrageous, he gave me 60 milligrams of prednisone. And the next day I had MRSA because it turns off your immune system. So I was hospitalized with MRSA for 4 days in the middle of a semester. Had surgery, antibiotics, you name it. Got free and clear of that and healed up. Before you know it, a friend came over and cooked, left the burner on, and I managed to burn myself in a grease fire pretty bad. My hand, my arm, my chest, second, third degree burns. Had to go to a burn unit, all of it, in the middle of a semester, in the middle of working a full-time job. And even my eczema would get out of control to the point where I got to the university in my junior year, and I had impetigo show up on my face, which is yellow, scratching, plaques, just a mess. Just medical stuff that really kept me down about myself. But this is where God showed up again, and he uses us Christians, and we have no idea what he's doing when he's doing it. My German teacher for German 101 was not a professor. He was a student who was teaching. His name was Dan. He's a really interesting character. He started sharing about his faith in the classroom at a University of Missouri, of all places. Talked about openly about being a Christian, which it's taboo to do anymore. And when I got that impetigo, and I was at home and I was thinking about quitting school, something came over me to go onto the campus and to look for this man. So I did. And it was warm, but I got a hoodie on and covered my face as best as I could and went to seek him out. He didn't have an office or anything to go see him in. As I got to campus, I immediately spotted him sitting on a bench under a tree, people watching. He was a different kind of person as a Christian. He was just existing and taking it all in, while all of us were on our phones, texting or thinking about our next class. And he was so graceful with me when I just broke down and said, I don't know what to do. I can't come to class like this. I have to go to the emergency room. And he encouraged me that no matter what, he would give me the chance to pass the class. Now he goes by Pastor Dan Rickman, and he's also a pastor for the GMC over in Oklahoma. That was a special moment because a Christian showed me so much grace when I felt so bad about myself. I just wanted to go home and hide. I was secular, but I did find a church eventually out there in Columbia. It was a church that was real big on apologetics. I got introduced to C.S. Lewis and Mere Christianity, and I got to start seeing how this Jesus stuff actually kind of makes sense. I'm starting to get it. I'm starting to see how it can all be real. And I'm even putting the pieces together with the Bible and science, and this might be the real way, and there might actually be life after death. Because all we're taught in school is that we're a blob of cells, just nerves and cells. And when we die, we go in the ground, and we have no consciousness, no existence. I found that that's not true. So I began studying apologetics as a hobby. I ended up serving at that church. Full transparency, I was chasing a girl. God will do that. He'll use a boy or a girl to drag you into church if he has to. He'll do whatever he's got to do to bring you home. I explored in philanthropy, which is really just doing service for other people so other people could see you doing it in a way. For me, it was. And I was void of the Spirit. I had all the knowledge that I needed about God, about apologetics, about Scripture, but I didn't know about the Spirit. I didn't know if all this stuff was really just analogies, if even like demons were real. A lot of the pastors I was listening to were telling me hell wasn't real. I just had to piece it all together, but I didn't have the power of the Holy Spirit because I didn't invite it, I didn't ask for it, and I didn't really believe in it. So my senior year was tough. My senior year, I was leaving a football game. I threw a cigarette out the window and I got a DUI. I was on my own for that. There was no support. My kind of family is like, all right, you did it. Go figure it out. So I was extremely poor in my senior year. I used change to put gas in my tank. And by the end of my senior year, I was waiting for it to be over, and I was going to the gas station to get shooters, to go home and drink myself to sleep every night. Finally, I got out, and I even got a job offer at MetLife. I had pursued this job pretty heavily, and I knew it was going to be an outrageous paying job, and that I was going to be a success. So I graduated with my computer science degree December 2015. And that's why I titled this next slide, Made It, with quotations, because a lot of times in our lives we're striving for something, and we think when we get there, we've made it, and we're going to be good and content, and we're not going to need anything else. There's only one thing that fills that gap. That's Jesus. But I didn't know it at the time. So I lived a party lifestyle. I was real big into karaoke. It was a great way to meet people, to walk into a bar by yourself and walk out with some friends. As I moved around for my job, that's how I would socialize. I didn't move to a new state with anyone else with me. I was always alone. I relocated to Dallas, Texas for my training with MetLife, and I thought I was pretty hot stuff. I was traveling every 2 months, going to different cities I'd never been to, going to rooftop bars and all this stuff. Thought it was so valuable. But when I had left for Dallas, I had a panic attack for the first time. I wasn't worried about anything. I just did. It just happened on the road. And I didn't know what it was, but I swear I was about to fall over and die. That's all I knew, was I was dying, and I didn't know why. Well, there's a good remedy for panic attacks that lasts for about 2 hours, and it's called alcohol. And I started drinking, basically to treat myself for that. Now, I wasn't just drinking to go out and party, but I was drinking in the evenings when I was alone. I finished up all the requirements for my training a little bit early, and I got sent to Phoenix, Arizona. I didn't like it there at all, and because of that, alcohol took over. Every moment that I wasn't at work, I was either at the bar or at home drinking. I was making friends out there, but they weren't the kind of friends that will lead you to anything of value. Just show up and be together. It was at a bar called Starters. I would do a lot of karaoke or go up there on Sundays and sit for NASCAR and meet with people. And eventually I met Jamie, my now wife, at that bar where she was a bartender. We met in the summer of 2017, and we were pretty much stuck together like glue from the moment we met. And it was the biggest disaster anyone's ever known. It's like two trains coming together, because we were both on the verge of full-blown alcoholism. And when we came together, well, it manifested itself. I purchased a new car that I thought would make things better, a BMW 1 Series, which is extremely ironic when I get to the next part. So the next part is the fall, and Jamie and I were drinking non-stop. Couldn't sleep for 2 hours without waking up to have a swig of vodka or whiskey or whatever hard alcohol it was. Beer was like water. Oh, gosh. We were evicted in 2018. I lost my job at MetLife. Jamie lost her job. That summer, we hit the road not knowing where we were going to go. We pulled into a hotel, and we had enough money for a week there. I called out to my mom, and she called out to another Christian friend of ours, and again, God showed up. There was a caravan going across the country from church, and they went out of their way to come down to Phoenix, Arizona, and meet us out in the parking lot and pray for us and pray against the evil spirits and demonic forces that were oppressing us. Even though we didn't really believe it, we just thought we were mentally messed up, a psychology case. They knew what was really going on. And they prayed, and they gave us this care package, and I still, if you see me walking around in a red shirt with a little heart on the front, it's from that care package, because we kept as much of it as we could while we were homeless. We'd move on to Colorado. That's where we would decide to spend our time homeless. Alcoholism raged until we arrived in Estes Park, and I started vomiting blood, lots and lots of blood, multiple times. So we went to the emergency room and found out that I had pancreatitis from my drinking. And then soon we found out that I was going into heart failure as well. I had only been binging for about a year or two. It's not just a toxin that gets people in their 40s and 50s and 60s. You can binge drink yourself into death really quick. And I learned that. In the hospital, I went through the stages of withdrawals from alcohol. And there's 3. The first is your anxiety and your shakes that everyone's familiar with. The second is seizures. And the third is hallucinations. They had me so drugged up with morphine and Ativan that I got to skip the seizures. I didn't get to skip the hallucinating. I remember my mom got out there. Jamie was there. I was seeing things all over the room. And they started to change into bad things, like scorpions dancing around outside the door and shadows and bugs. I would take pictures and try to show them, because on my phone, the pictures of what I was hallucinating was there. I saw it on both screens, my eyes and on the phone, but no one else could see it. And eventually I just faded out. It was at this point, I think, is when my mom was being informed about my resting heart rate being somewhere around 170. I wasn't doing good, like I was going to survive. My heart was too inflamed. That's when I had, I guess, what you call a near-death experience. I think people that have actually died have had a death experience. I call this a near-death experience. I never died. But I awoke, bear with me here, a little above my own body, conscious, aware, looking forward at the wall. It was a white wall in the ICU room, but now there was a picture, just pitch black archway. And there was something with eyes leaning in from the side, staring at me like he was just waiting to collect my body. I don't know any other way to put it. He didn't seem to recognize that I was looking back at him. He was looking below me. And he was just staring. And I couldn't believe what I was looking at, because when you research near-death experiences, you'll find out that they say things like, it was more real than I ever imagined. It was more real than reality itself. And this was real. I knew that I could, with my will, go through that door and be gone with that thing. But I definitely did not want to. And I definitely knew I didn't have to. I didn't know why at the time, but I didn't have to go. So I stayed put. That haunted me, though, as I went forward. I came out of there after 11 days in the ICU, and I was sober, and I could not figure out what that experience was. I'd been so secular and so sure of being able to identify and work with the physical that when I saw something that was beyond my own conception, I didn't know what to do with it, but I knew that there was something beyond just this world that we understand. So we were humbled and we were homeless. We were homeless in Colorado from October of 2018 until October of 2019. We had countless relapses. I'm not here to say that that was the end of my drinking. It wasn't. I relapsed a lot. I showed up at the hospital one time, and I had a 0.5 BAC, which is like 6 times the driving limit. 0.08 is your driving limit. 0.5 was my actual BAC, and I can still remember it because I'd gotten so accustomed to being drunk that when I wasn't drunk, that's when I felt sick. Jamie has her own experiences that she went through. She also saw things that we can't explain, but I will leave that for her testimony. So we became part of the homeless community. What do you do when you're homeless? When it's not mealtime or bedtime, where do you go? Parking lots, parks, walk around. For us, we would do Instacart. We would deliver to make a little bit of scrap money. And we kept trying to build ourselves back up to a spot where we would have a home again. And that's where we would go be sober and live our lives. We never got there in Colorado. We were alone. We continued to relapse. Eventually, I had a conversation with Jamie, and it was a hard one. I feel like God put it on my heart that it's now or never. You make a decision at this point, or you're getting buried in a few months. You have to decide. You can't keep living on the fence. You can't keep relapsing. You can't keep making excuses. It's time to figure this out. So I sat with Jamie and I told her, I think you should go back to Alaska to be with your parents, and I should go back to Missouri to be with mine, and we should call this whole thing quits because we're nothing but bad for each other. She didn't want to do that. She said, I want to try this one more time, but actually try this. So we agreed that we would go to Springfield, Missouri, because it was close to Branson, where my mom and my stepdad were at the time. And we would live in the parking lot of the Walmart there, get jobs, and build up enough money to get into a hotel. I wrote an email to my mom that night explaining all these things that we were going to do and trying to justify how crazy I was for staying with the girl that I had gone through all this with. And they invited us to come home and to stay with them. And you have to understand, when you've watched your child go through all this, you don't like that other person that they're with. And I know that my mom had a lot to get over to learn to live with Jamie, and her family had a lot to get over to learn to live with me. And then now we all get along great, but it was a long road to get there. So we got 3 weeks staying with them. We went from a shelter to a car to a couch to eventually a motel. We get weekly stays at that motel and continued to move up. We worked jobs, we stayed sober, and eventually we got an apartment. And when COVID hit, we got that apartment in St. Louis because we needed to actually find work. We assumed that we were infertile. We didn't think we could have kids. We didn't think we would have kids. We got a dog and just kind of chalked it up to that. We poisoned our bodies so bad we're lucky to be alive, let alone to create life ourselves. I apologize. God had other plans, though. On our 9th month of celebrating sobriety, we found out that we were pregnant with twins. That sealed the deal. There was no going back. We were never going to pick up a drink again. Everything changed. And God provided everything we needed through love of family and friends and miracles too, to get us to the pregnancy and through the pregnancy and the birth, which were difficult. There was some time in NICU. All the while, we were still looking for a church. We walked into many of these churches that have huge crowds. Thousands of people attend them. One of them, during this COVID thing, was up there making I would call it as a salesperson making a sales pitch about vaccination, and I thought that was strange. And I started to realize that just because it's called a church doesn't mean it's a church. And we would eventually find a church where the pastor was patient, and he wanted to answer questions, and he wanted to talk to everyone, and that felt like a family. God didn't let us down, but he showed us all the ways not to do this whole pastorship thing first. The world we were presented doesn't add up. We knew that all this metaphysical existed, that there was something beyond us that we couldn't see, feel, touch, taste. We just didn't get it. But we were distracted because we had the twins coming. So, here they come. This is when our pursuit of God truly set off, where I was spending my free time watching sermons and theology debates and you name it, documentaries, everything I could figure out, to finally, once and for all, figure out what I actually believed about this Bible. What I wound up believing was everything. What I found was that all of it was real, and all of it was true. Our family and our friends finally realized that this time we meant it. We weren't falling back again. We weren't going to let them down. They circled the wagon, and I even got a job in sales again that was equivalent to the one that I had lost at MetLife. During that time, we still couldn't find a church, though. Finally, we realized that miracles are real. We never got tested by doctors to find out if we were infertile, but they made it. On the next slide, you'll see Caden Gerald Mueller and Amara Emerald Mueller were born on February 17th, 2021. It was after they were born, when we got Ben at home, that I got on my knees and prayed to God, and I asked him for wisdom of all things. I remembered Solomon and his wisdom that he asked God, and how God was pleased that he asked for wisdom and he gave it to him. So I prayed for it too. And I forgot about this verse from the Ecclesiastes that we read. For in much wisdom is much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Because when I learned about the world, it invokes a lot of grief. But what I finally figured out is that beyond this world is eternity, is everything. That this life is a prologue to a book that doesn't end. As I mentioned before, we finally found that church with the kids. We finally got the kids playing in Bible study and youth group. We finally got to do holidays with a church. We finally felt like not only did God have us, and was going to protect us and secure us, but that we were starting to walk with him. That we were finally getting this thing down, and that we actually had some meaning in our lives. For the first time, we understood what we were doing here. That's why I close with the end of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes 12, 6 through 14. Before the silver cord is severed, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher is broken at the spring, or the wheel broken at the cistern, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. All is vanity. Further, because the preacher was wise, he still taught the people knowledge. Yes, he pondered, sought out, and set in order many proverbs. The preacher sought to find out acceptable words, and that which was written blamelessly, words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads, and like nails well fastened are words from the masters of assemblies, which are given from one shepherd. Furthermore, my son, be admonished of making many books. There is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. This is the end of the matter. All has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every work into judgment with every hidden thing, whether it is good or whether it is evil. Next, I just want to say, as I titled this sermon, a thankful testimony, a thank you to each of you, anyone watching online, listening on the phone, for accepting us, for accepting me, for accepting my family and where we came from, that our story has a place in God's work when we never believed that to be the case, when we thought we were wasted, when we thought we were worthless, and when everything seemed so pointless. We know now God is greater than your past. God is greater than your sin. God is greater than your struggles. God is greater than your fears. And God is greater than your pain. God is good. And I dedicate this sermon in loving memory to my father, Gerald Jerry Mueller, born May 3rd, 1939, gone January 3rd, 2007. He didn't get the time he wanted, but he used the time that he had. Let's bow our heads in prayer. Father, thank you for giving this testimony to me to distribute. It's so powerful when you show up, when it's so obvious that you were there. We each have those stories. We each have those stories where we needed you and you were there. We each have those stories where you didn't answer the prayer that would have led us to destruction, but instead answered the prayer that led us to glory. You never leave our side, just like the footprints in the sand. When we think that you've left us and we're walking alone, that's when we know that you're carrying us, Father. You'll carry us through our hard times, and you'll glorify us in your time.